Welcome to the mind-body section. So this is a real treat. We have a great panel, and I'm going to briefly introduce all the people now, and then they will come up, and then we'll have some time for questions. As you know, we're a little bit behind schedule, but I have the okay for us to take the time that we need. Our first speaker is Niyati, and I think she's a very famous person. So she's an author, a public speaker, and an advocate. And I love her quote, "If it takes a village to raise a baby, it's going to take a bloody army to battle cancer." Then we have Kavita Mishra, Dr. Mishra. And Dr. Mishra is a radiation oncologist. She is an expert in mind-body, and she is at UCSF. And how I got to know her is that she is part of our Health, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee. And she's incredibly thoughtful. So we appreciate having Kavita. And our next speaker is Dr. Linda Larkey. So some of you may know that I spent a lot of time in Arizona. And when I was here, I had the tremendous pleasure of getting to know Dr. Larkey and of working together. So we did some great work with disparities, with mind-body, with Tai Chi, and I am very grateful to Linda for that. So she's also professor and researcher and is at ASU and at Mayo Clinic. So with that, we'll get started.
I have a step stool. Oh, there you go. Yay. Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. The C word. That's how some parts of the world refer to cancer. CA breast. That's how a subset of oncologists deliver a breast cancer diagnosis. I grew up in India where I saw this play out. It's a belief, superstition of sorts, that if you don't say an ominous word out loud, it won't come true. So when an oncologist sidesteps the word cancer, it's as if they're sidestepping the disease itself and reaffirming the superstition. If only it were that simple. Don't say the C word out loud and you will lead a disease-free life. In certain cultures, there's an indelible shame associated with cancer, as if to imply that we had a choice in the matter. A survey conducted in India showed that 53% of Indians are likely to believe that people with cancer brought it on themselves. So in 2018, when I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer, it came as no surprise to me when people told me to be quiet about my disease, keep it to myself. But what do I do when I've been asked to not talk about something because it's a taboo? I talk about it. I told my friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, anyone that was willing to hear. I even walked around without my wig. Next slide. The clicker is not working. Oh, there you go. So I was my vulnerable most, and I let the world see me as I went through 7 cycles of chemotherapy, opted for a double mastectomy and removal of 7 lymph nodes from my left side, and then 28 sessions of radiation using the easy to master breath hold technique. Radons in the room, we're gonna have a word. And I did so because I wanted to fight the stigma, the shame that was put on me about my disease at such a young age. But talking wasn't enough. And so the following year, after the end of my treatment, I was now a guest speaker at the Relay for Life event. And that wasn't enough. So I wrote a memoir about my breast cancer journey called Unafraid, A Survivor's Quest for Human Connection. That book got recognized by the Forbes magazine as a must-read in 2020. The book wasn't enough. So I got on the TED stage and did a talk on the cultural bias and stigma associated with cancer. Even that wasn't enough. So I wrote a second book. It's all about survivorship. And that book is called Unabashed Self-Advocacy and the Quest to Foster Empathy. And that I wasn't done yet. I've done fireside chats, been a keynote speaker, been a panelist like today, been in the local newspaper twice, the front cover of a magazine, and that's just to name a few. I bet they regret telling me to be quiet. Which is what brings me here today. I want to share parts of my journey with the hope that this will help you provide a more culturally cognizant and holistic approach towards cancer care. My first ask from you, tune into cultural sensitivity. Depending on a person's background, ethnicity, culture, heritage, they might find it difficult or downright shameful to talk about cancer. And let's be fair, this is not just my fellow homies. A global cancer survey showed that in Mexico, people are likely to believe that cancer is a form of punishment. In South Africa, cervical cancer is highly stigmatized because the cervix is not part of the body you talk about out loud. And so the more you educate yourself about these biases, the better you're going to be in understanding your patient and where they're coming from. And then you can tailor your resources to giving them the support, because that might be the difference between them being fully supported by a strong community versus them suffering in silence. My second ask. Sorry, just a moment. My second ask, create a space that is safe from toxic positivity. I can't tell you the number of times when I was going through treatment, people reminded me, oh, just be positive. Now, if being positive could wish away my chemotherapy, I would be ODing on optimism. But what comfort I got instead was from my oncologist, Stephanie, we're on a first name basis, who acknowledged that losing hair at the age of 34 is hard, who let me feel my lows, but also ride my highs. A friend of mine who lives in Peoria, Illinois, is a mother to 6-year-old twin boys. She was recently diagnosed with breast cancer. She took a list of questions for her oncologist because she was curious about side effects and how they were going to manage a household of 2 twins. The oncologist told her to not worry so much. Here's the thing. Anger, anxiety, relief, joy, hope, sorrow, hopelessness, and everything in between are a gamut of emotions us survivors are allowed to have. And it is no one's place to placate our journey. The chase for the silver lining did not end there. It doesn't end with treatment. Now I get approached by people who want to know, what are the lessons cancer taught me and how beautiful my life is now that I'm on the other side. My life was rainbows before cancer. I lived a life untainted, felt unbridled joy, and danced unapologetically. Cancer took a part of me, and I will never be grateful for that experience. What I am thankful for is my solid cancer care team, the cocktail of chemo that was given to me, and the gentle healing beam of radiation that has rendered me disease-free. And I'm also grateful for the glue that held it all together, and an oncology team that did not mandate positivity. The third thing, give a heads up to your patient that survivorship might be a struggle in its own right. While I was going through cancer treatment, I had a calendar printed and pasted to my bedroom wall. And every day I would mark an X for one more day that I had to endure treatment. And before you know it, we were at the end of the road. At my 28th session of radiation, I was having my last consultation with my radiation oncologist. And I felt lost. I wasn't ready for this. We had gone months where an entire specialized medical team is watching me like a hawk. And now what? I'm supposed to fly? I wasn't ready. And I wish someone had given me a heads up that there are some very complex and contradictory emotions that come with the end of treatment. Now, if time were no barrier, I have buckets of unsolicited but deeply personal advice and anecdotes to share with you, because I know together we can be more empathetic towards patients, caregivers, and survivors, and provide tailored services intrinsic to their unique needs. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much.
I might shift this over. I've got a few more inches on you. All right. Niyati, thank you so much. And thank you to all the speakers and the planning committee. It has been such a joy, and Lorenzo, wherever you are, what a beautiful talk, Niyati, yours as well. I'm Kavita Mishra, and I'll be today speaking on personalized meditation. And the idea that we live in this personalized medicine world, and how do we really think about tailoring cancer mind-body medicine for patients using scientific, sociocultural, and patient-centered models. So let's see the screen button. It's going to do it. There it is. And actually, as we start, let's all go ahead and take a breath as I tell you that I have no financial disclosures. 4 parts to the talk. We'll talk through the landscape of mind-body medicine, mindfulness meditation, our UCSF experience in piloting and designing a mind-body medicine group visit course series, and Dr. Atreya, who is will be speaking more on it as well later on today, has been my co-pilot, and I'm ever so grateful for her. We really tried to center that mind-body medicine series on diversity. And so we'll talk a lot about an equity and empowerment lens that we used. And we'll take a bird's eye view from looking at some of the theoretical constructs to how do we really apply this for patients. So what is mind-body medicine? Well, it's a diverse set of practices that focuses on interactions between the mind, body, and behavior. And it's really about promoting health, and it can include meditations, breath work, body, compassion, training, movement, meditation, which is really important for cancer patients going through the cancer journey. Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, relaxation techniques, expressive techniques, which often don't get thought about when a patient first enters the room asking about meditation, but dance, writing, art, music, these are really important ways to have meditational experiences, and being out in nature. And we heard from Dr. Cohen this morning that there are a number of symptoms that patients can be benefited from with mind-body medicine, which can be physical, things like sleep, fatigue, pain, nausea, psychosocial issues like stress, depression, anxiety, fear of recurrence, and then cognitive and existential questions that often come up as we're going through a cancer journey. Why me? Why now? And so meditational practices can help us potentially think about having greater awareness, self-compassion, gratitude, reflection. And Dr. Cohen did a beautiful job of going through a lot of that data. And here, many people in this room have been part of developing the guidelines for SIO, ASCO, and the NCCN. So before we get too far, let's think about really what is meditation. It's a 10-letter word, I think, yes. And it is really hard to define. And if you think about also, how would you really think about what meditation is? And when I consider where I first got introduced to meditational concepts, it was actually my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, in a small town in Kurja, northern India. And he would hold these satsangs, these community get-togethers each night. And I would be out there with my cousins, kind of listening in, waiting for that last bell to ring. And somewhere in that hour, I'd get to absorb breath meditation, mantra meditation, sound meditation. But honestly, what I remember is waiting at that door for the bell so that I could go running inside to get rock candy, pure sugar, fantastic. But somewhere in that process, of course, I started to absorb these meditational techniques. in their garden in the back, they would host sadhus and gurus. And I remember this one guru during the summer for about 3 months would be there, literally standing in tree pose for 16 hours. That's hard. And the only time I would see him move is when he would go from the right leg to the left leg. 16 hours. This is my child trying that more recently. He lasted about a minute. He's got about 959 more minutes to go. Dance meditation, as I mentioned earlier, really important as we think about what may resonate for patients. And we'll come back to this later. And then this is me in Bhutan. We took a year off, my 2 kids and my husband, and we traveled 25 countries, 7 continents. And part of that was studying mind-body practices around the world. And this is a Bhutanese practice, Twin Hearts. And the reason why I show this is because for patients, often things may resonate on one day, maybe not the next day, especially as they're going through treatment and the ups and downs of those cycles. And what may resonate for one person may not for another. So here you see this Twin Hearts meditation really was resonating for me. My husband is asleep on the side, which can often happen, especially as a patient is feeling fatigued. Meditation can be hard to define, but this is a definition from the contemplative literature saying that meditation can take many forms and is a critical component of mind-body medicine that most generally refers to any practice that involves self-regulation of attention in a sustained fashion, potentially allowing deepening states of concentration, tranquility, or insight, broadening the field of awareness, and developing altruistic tendencies, potentially. And there are numerous types of meditations across cultures and times. One meditation that has been widely studied in the modern healthcare setting is mindfulness meditation. And Dr. Carlson and many others in this room have really been pioneers in that field. And mindfulness meditation at the broadest level generally aims to develop an awareness of thoughts, emotions, and judgments, physical sensations in a kind, observant, and non-judgmental manner. So as we took some of that background and we thought about what is mind-body medicine and how is it delivered in the healthcare setting, one piece that really resonated for us was that racial and ethnic minorities often have much less access to integrative oncology and particularly mind-body medicine. A lot of the studies that have been done in the space are with Caucasian patients and or breast cancer survivors, but more limited. And so we tried to design and pilot a mind-body series that was really tailored to diverse patients and active treatment for advanced cancer. Because often those 8-week courses, though they are beautiful, can be difficult for a patient as they're going through treatment to really try to handle. And so we made a hybrid format of mindfulness-based stress reduction along with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, which is also a really wonderful training method. And the other thing that we did was we tried to bring the group practice together with individual consults. 4 Fridays, so 4 weeks. We had 2 facilitators, Dr. Atreya and myself, and then we've also actually brought in other co-facilitators over time. And we had a smallish group of 8 patients by design that we would take through these 4 weeks. We've done 9 pilots up till now, so about 72 patients. And we were really trying to figure out how to do this better for more patients. And so we had quality improvement research with baseline assessments, demographics, and evaluations throughout the courses. We did bill this to insurance, and I'm happy to talk about some of those logistics because that can be quite important as we look forward into our field, dealing with authorizations, consent forms, notes, all of that. And I'll give you some of the numbers. Dr. Atreya will go through more of the quantitative analysis later, but we had 54% BIPOC representation, 31% were male, and 85% had metastatic disease. These were the 4 weeks, cultivating emotional balance, mindful eating, movement, and really thinking about fatigue and sleep. And not going through all the details, but this was how our 2 hours were set up. And the blue, in blue are the different types of meditations that we were really trying to experience with our patients. And then we were also having some didactics and a community share out, as well as individual consults for about 7 or 8 minutes. In terms of the qualitative analysis, we were trying to figure out what were the overall themes that were coming back in the feedback, both orally and written, from the patients, from the caregivers, from our own reflections, from other team members and fellows that we had. And the first was around empowerment, empowerment with knowledge, empowerment with practices. And patients would talk about, having resources now that they could use to adapt and make positive changes in their life. Importantly, having the discovery of what they can do versus what they cannot do. And particularly this patient talked about being able to do chair yoga, which was part of our teaching when they couldn't do some of their other yoga practices. The second big theme that came out was around being experiential and practical and really trying to have patients leave with nuggets that they could carry forward. And so patients wrote in things like enjoying having that balance between understanding the data and actually spending time on learning, and then having constructive choices and changes without being overwhelming. The third piece was having this community forum and really tapping into group wisdom. We have our individual human experience, and there is commonality of the human experience, and hearing that and seeing that can help us in this journey. And so patients wrote in, having that connection really made that patient feel more receptive to trying and growing and learning. And I really enjoyed this patient's comment where he said, I found solace in the idea that my experience is both entirely unique and somewhat predictable. And he went on to talk about how having folks of different backgrounds in the course really helped him understand mindfulness from different perspectives. And then finally, diversity of patients and diversity of practices. And so we had patients write in that, hey, having a diverse group was really important. And it also, the diversity was not just in what we saw, but really much more beyond that diagnosis. And the diversity of practices between Eastern and Western medicine and different ways of meditating. This patient in particular would talk about how he would doze off every time he tried to do a sitting meditation. And so learning walking meditation with breath work or Qigong was really meaningful for him. I'm going to focus in on two of those aspects of empowerment and diversity because that was really critical to what we were thinking about. And this is the 5 Ps, equity and empowerment lens. It's been used by the CDC and some other health institutions in terms of how do you make programmatic changes and adapt programs thinking about equity as a focus. And so purpose is really about partners aligning to define, communicate, and integrate practices towards this ultimate goal of equity. And this was clear to us from the beginning that our mission was about diversity and inclusion, and we had at least 50% BIPOC enrollment, and that was really actively recruited. Those slots were filled first, and then others were joined. People, and when I talk about people, it's really the patients, the facilitator team, the caregivers, the whole bit. And the way it's defined is considering physical, emotional, spiritual, and contextual effects, and importantly, the barriers. What gets in the way of us moving forward? Lots of things that we talked about and thought about as we were developing the program, not just race and ethnicity, of course, gender, age, abilities. We would make modifications to postures if there were differences in physical abilities, and that became part of how we thought about future series. Socioeconomic status, we had patients with food and housing insecurity. And so we adapted our language to make sure that when we were talking about mindful eating, we're talking about food insecurity as well. Diagnosis, stage, treatment, we had folks in the middle of radiation, in the middle of chemotherapy, post-op. And so really thinking about how do we adapt these really well-established programs for patients of diverse backgrounds. We had a really wide variety of folks who had spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs of different takes, some folks that really wanted the science, some folks that really didn't want the science. And so just thinking about those adaptations. And then finally, the comfort with language and technology and the comfort with being in a group was also really important. And one piece of that was having that individual time where patients could come and reflect with us individually if something didn't feel comfortable to say within the group. And then we also had a staff person helping support us on the technology side so that we could really be present over Zoom, which is how we did this. So place is the third P, accounting for emotional and physical safety. And the idea here was to structure, again, the group in the individual format, do it over 4 weeks so that it was more attainable, having the group size of 8, doing it over Zoom and having the appropriate staffing to help that. And we had patients coming in from multiple locations, literally from the infusion center, being driven to a clinic appointment from the waiting room. And then having a process that empowers. I'm not going to go through all these details, but having the range of practices and formats to really align with patients and how they learn and how they want to share. One of the key concepts was inner wisdom. And so the idea of mindfulness really being able to track awareness of what's happening for you, and then also try to track what solutions you may already have within you to help yourself. And so that was something that really resonated for patients, as the power was within, when sometimes in the cancer journey, it can feel very chaotic and out of one's control. Slides were tried to be very representative. We obviously used gender pronouns and encouraged that with our patients. Feedback that we got orally and written, we tried to really adapt based on that. And some of those examples we've talked about. Having home practices that were reflective of patients and their needs. And then naming the cultural origins of a lot of the practices that we were talking about. And then the final P is power, and shifting the dynamics to better integrate voices and priorities. And one of the key concepts that I've always been a big believer of is that we are all learners and teachers, literally from the first day that we were on this planet until the last day. And so I learn as much from a baby about unconditional love and wonder and joy as I do for my 92-year-old patient who says, hey, when I look in the mirror, this is what I see. I see my 23-year-old self. And when I first became the woman that I am now. And so that concept of all of us being learners and teachers really helped to shift the dynamic of power. And all of us facilitators were also participants in those group exercises. And it was really about group sharing versus giving advice. And so we would try to model that as well, especially in the group experience portion. We made space for different beliefs, had the feedback, and really tried to have trauma-informed practices, and that individual time, if something came up, we would use that as well. So now just taking the last few minutes to take a bird's eye view and say, hey, how do we take these theoretical constructs, these socio-cultural constructs, and tailor our meditation prescriptions? And so you see here someone helicoptering into the top of the Himalayas saying, Guru, what's the meaning of life? But make it quick. I've got an important meeting in half an hour. And I feel like that's how we live today. So one of the models in meditation from the contemplative literature talks about meditational wisdoms as attentional, constructive, and deconstructive. And so as we think about what patients may be resonating with and what patients may want to or need to or end up gaining out of meditational practices, it may fall into these buckets. So attentional, about focus, being in the present moment; constructive, really about kindness, compassion, self-compassion; deconstructive, dealing with some of those existential questions of what does our impermanence mean, and how are we interconnected. From that contemplative literature, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but there were other models that were also developed. And this model talks about the different stages that we may experience as we go through different meditations. And it was bucketed into these 5 stages. And as I thought about how do we tailor these theoretical constructs to patients, there were a few concepts that really came out as we think about patient tailoring. Number one, the fluidity. The fluidity of the human experience is very different from how we tend to think with Western models. And I like buckets, I like stages. And as we experience things in life, it can really be contextual depending on what is happening in our life with the meditations, outside of the meditations. And so the idea of drawing this as an infinity sign, working with other Osher collaborators, was really to express that fluidity of the model when we experience it. Number 2, diversity. There's a real diversity of practices and wisdoms. And so how do we think about that in the context of these different stages? And then finally, centering on mindful living, so that we're obviously practicing this practice so that we can live, breathe, eat, act in a mindful way. And so when we think about applying all of these constructs for the personalization of meditation, we would take a couple of these different practices and focus in with our patients to prescribe meditation. And we would use SMART goals to be very specific in our prescription. And one thing that I just want to point out is we started to develop this idea of mind-body medicine snacks. So just like we have nutritional snacks, a colleague of mine talks about exercise snacks. We can also have mind-body snacks where if there's a minute or two in a waiting room or between talks or wherever, you can actually take that moment to have a mind-body medicine snack. So to close, I hope that we've been able to talk about some of the critical gaps that exist in the current knowledge base and in integrative oncology in terms of how we are treating patients and how do we treat more effectively. We certainly found that centering mind-body medicine group medical visits on equity and empowerment was feasible and really essential, and we continue to learn. I consider myself a lifelong learner, and this is definitely a part of how we want to go forward. And then using theoretical and practical constructs to really think about how to empower diverse patients with personalized mind-body prescriptions. And as we go into the future, we are thinking about how do we manualize this, and we've started to manualize it, but also allow for that flexibility within the manual and tailor practices for patients with that diversity in mind. And I want to have a huge shout out to all the folks on this slide who have all been a part of it. It does take a village and sometimes a bloody army. So thank you.
Well, that was delicious. A lot more than just snacks. Thank you. So I am aware that we have gone through a presentation that was very personal, an individual with a whole set of cultural things brought into life, then brought into the cancer experience and the no talk rules. We don't talk about that. And then the reflection that she shared along the way of how that bringing that in and her own personal personality, which is a little contrary to the original one, having made a difference in the way that she interacted. The information is invaluable to hear that kind of story from an individual with the lens of the culture they came from. And then to have a presentation that says, you know, we've been doing this mind body stuff. It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more diverse, even in our offerings. And then to share this example of bringing a smorgasbord to patients to be able to make their own practices work for them. And I think of how many times I have thought about, worked with as a researcher, how do we find what will work for somebody? Well, just lay it all out, give them a snack, and then they get to, well, that one worked. I think I'll go for that one. We actually did a small study a few years ago that looked at what happens if you give people a momentary experience of sort of a quiet seated meditation, 5 minutes, and then you give them just get up and feel what it feels like to move and use your breath to get into the flow and stay with that. But before we did that, we asked them, do they think that they're more likely to be able to go into an easy meditative state if they're sitting or if they're standing and moving? And then we did heart rate variability all across during the movements and before and after. And we did find that for those people that thought that they would do more, be more able to go into a meditative state if they were sitting, are maybe a certain kind of person, and they actually did. And then there are other people that say, no, I do a little better if I get to move. I'm like that. I beat myself up for years about, I can't meditate. I just, my mind. And moving, which I was doing yoga, I just didn't really quite understand. Oh yeah, that's meditation. And Qigong later became my go-to. So understanding that we all have our individual differences is very important, and that there might be ways even in the context of programs like that to start drawing on what are some of the entry variables, what are the things about their diversity and their backgrounds and their culture, and our solid tumors versus hematological cancers, what is the headset that people bring in? So I think we have already heard a whole lot that might work for us in thinking about this issue of diversity in the context of mind body. I will be talking on a similar subject, but thinking about how might we think in a broader way if we don't have the luxury of offering these smorgasbords of programs with lots of options, where might we think about how we can begin to move towards and adapt and bring in more diverse hat thinking in our programmatic work, so that we have ways to begin to appeal to and attract, and then also deliver in ways that will work better. Now, I think when they were putting this program together, diversity. Well, Linda, she did that presentation a few years ago on recruiting diversity in recruiting populations that are often not well represented in our research. And most of my research back then, when I was presenting, had been primarily with cancer prevention and screening. And so I did a lot of work around, one of the models I developed was using storytelling as a way to represent the voices of the people who are saying, here's how and why I decided to get screened for colorectal cancer, despite the ick factor. This is what worked for me, and being able to take their culture into their story. And then we didn't have to figure out what are the ways to reach people of that particular culture. And so that was one of the models I was working, even though then I had already started doing work with Qigong and Tai Chi with breast cancer survivors. Back then, and still, a lot of this work, it is like climbing a mountain to get your population coming into your studies that are representing diverse populations. And even when we set goals and we look at the literature for most people that do set those goals, we're still mostly, I mean, some of you have done it, researchers and in your cancer centers have probably done an incredible job of bringing in more than you might expect, but still we have a long way to go to be able to bring diverse populations into our research as well as into our cancer centers to receive supportive care. I did, in the last couple of weeks, I've had a doctoral student working in a different area, not in cancer, but working in the area of looking at mind-body research with African Americans with cardiometabolic risk. So I know that's a little bit off topic, but she ended up finding out of her systematic review 14 studies that fit the criteria. She didn't even ask for only randomized controlled trials, but just that there would be a comparison group. Ended up with 14 studies. And we just did a peek. Out of those 14, how many of those even mentioned anything about either adapting the program before they started it, or seeing if there was something they could learn afterwards, like how did that fit for you? Or even, and there was one beautiful one that started off with a group of researchers and folks that were African-American building a program out of yoga and African dance and pulling them together. And so it was just rich with culture from the ground up. It was built that way. They didn't have to do an after the fact. How did that fit for you? Of course it fit. So there's this broad range. Out of the 14, there were only 7 that mentioned anything about taking into account the possibility that this might be an awkward fit, or it may be a perfect fit, but nobody was looking at it in the other 7. It wasn't being talked about. And so I know that we have a little bit of that going on in our field, that when we address and work with cancer patients, sometimes we just say, well, there's this lovely yoga class, or there's this Qigong. So we have a lot in the mix that we're doing well, and a lot in the mix that maybe we still may need to move forward on. So what I've experienced, one of my areas of foundational training is in communication and intercultural communication. And so I think about some of these different ways that we look at intercultural communication and bring that lens to how we might do a more informed job of thinking through how do we build programs that will attract, appeal to, work for, fit a broader variety of people. And short of being able to do the smorgasbord, there are a couple of things that we can start with. And the first, that sort of the lowest entry level point, is the ability to advertise. I mean, I'm going to use that word because how you put the message out about what it is that you've got can make all the difference. There may be someone of a particular culture, a particular religion, a particular whatever, and they see Tai Chi and they're going, and they're not going to even think about joining it. They're not going to be interested. And so finding ways, and I know the cheapest shot is making sure to put people with, sort of different backgrounds in the picture on the brochure. So you can do that, yes. But what about doing things like finding language that is appealing, going to the groups of people who you are trying to reach and finding out, would you come if you called it this instead of that? One of the things we did in our first largest Qigong study with breast cancer survivors was to call it rejuvenating movement, so that they didn't think they were coming in. I mean, we said based on when they got to the consent form, so they knew what they were getting, but it wasn't like they were at first responding to something that said Tai Chi or Qigong, because I don't think we would have gotten the diverse sample that we did. And it still was not as diverse as we might want it to be. But finding ways to present it so that it might feel a little less like, oh, that's that thing that, white cisgender straight women do, and we know, college educated, we know what that demographic is that tends mostly to come, even though we're really spanning out and there's a lot of change that's been going on in the last decade or so. The second is conscientiously adapting, and that is taking a program that has already been developed and not just changing the language about how we're bringing people in and what's being advertised, but actually adapting the program and finding a group of people who are willing to work with you, a community advisory board, a group of patients who would say, how, here, would you sample a little bit of this and then tell me, does this fit for you? What might we change? And then adapting it before going into it. Or the other scenario is that you do the study and you get to the other end and say, we probably ought to ask all of the people that came into this what we might do differently to make it fit better for their particular population. So adaptation. The third, though, and this is where I am most inspired, is how might we develop more, help more to happen within these contexts of appealing to and bringing in and developing programs within. In the communication literature, we call this an emic approach instead of etic. Instead of just taking what is there and then changing it, you go within. It's what we did with storytelling. We went to the people who we were wanting to reach, and we had them create the story, create the intervention, create the language and the scenarios that would be appealing. So what about starting instead of with, we want to deliver meditation, we want to deliver mind body, we want to deliver something that says you're going to be doing these practices with these names. Instead, go down the line and say, what do we want to see happen? We want people to find and discover their inner wisdom. We want people to find that stillness practice that works for them. And you call it names that are generic as heck, so that you're not asking people to come up with, how might yoga work best for you? You've got a quagmire of issues there. You think of all the different mind-body practices and all the different religions and philosophies and different things that they are stemming from. I love that you named all of the different cultural roots for those. So as part of your smorgasbord, you get to see, oh, it's all over the map, it's all over the world, the stuff that comes from. But what if we did go to the place that said, what is it that might work for you? Is there something from your world, your culture, that would reach those same goals? And ending up with something that is developed just for a particular group, that has not just the face on the brochure, but from the heart level, feels like home, feels like this is something my grandmother would have taught me to do. And having that kind of practice is, I think, where we might best go. And that's a good reflection back and forth from the smorgasbord, is how do you offer all of those for all of the people, all of the time in your cancer center? I think the last thing that I would want to see is that if we were to do that, then if we had defined what are those things we're aiming for, stillness, inner wisdom access, something that gives you a powerful influence on your autonomic nervous system to shift over to something that is a lot sweeter and where those biochemicals can change, where you make your own medicine. If that were the end result that we were looking for, how might we measure that to see if we're being successful? I'm always voting for, I mean, I'm totally into heart rate variability and the coherence kind of measures because we see so many things correlated with that. And it's a totally non-invasive measure. So you can kind of hook people up without drawing their blood and, you know, having them go through a stick is, I think, having them not go through a stick is a nice way to go. But finding what are the core things that you're really trying to aim for to find out if those programs are effective. So you don't have to take off the research or the evidence cap. I think if we had the ability to measure across all people, all, you know, what was my title? Something like Across the Universe. No, I'm not going to play any Beatles music, but the thing that is important here is that we find what is at core to these practice and then go from the inside out from within any given type of person or culture. We've been working with women with mobility impairment. We've been working with the Latino population in English and in Spanish and developing from within, having them design the classes. A few of these things that were in the early stages of pilot studies, but I would encourage you to be thinking that way too, not just in your research, but as you develop your programs in your cancer centers.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for all of you for your attention. Are there any questions? Please, to the mic. While you go to the mic, there is a question in the chat for Niyati. Did you try any integrative practices during your experience? Is the mic on?
Mic 9.
Yes. They said it's on.
Right. So I think I'm still coming to terms with what integrative means. And what I've learned in this conference is that tools that I use, for me, my therapy, the catharsis was in my writing. That was the place where I felt the most safe, that the pages that I was writing on would not judge me back, would let me feel every emotion, and I felt validated. And so I use that form as part of my integrative experience. I didn't, however, do some of the other traditional things such as yoga or Tai Chi. It's also a function of where I was treated. It's a smaller town, so we have limited resources. So I had to come up with my own resources. And for me, it was writing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my question to the panel is, you know, in terms of mind-body connection, is there a role for prayer? I mean, I didn't hear that as part of the, and again, coming back to the cultural sensitivity, that may be something that may be more appropriate for certain patients. If it's effective, I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
I can start and then the others I'm sure will join in. It's a beautiful question. I think something that the field is still figuring out how to define that. And, you know, even the word mindfulness originally came in the 70s, and the idea was in some parts to not call it meditation because meditation was kind of foo-foo and out there and hippie. And so mindfulness became a secular form of meditation is how some people define it. And so I think, at least in our experience with these group medical practices, we have really tried to be open to whatever religious belief, spiritual belief or not, because meditation, mindfulness can be weaved into whatever that broader belief system is for any one patient. And so prayer, whatever that prayer is for one individual may be different to others. And so allowing that to be what it is for the patient, and some part of that, or maybe all of it, is also meditational. So yeah, we really try to keep open to all of those systems. And actually, as we would adapt meditations, even ad hoc, I might even comment on having different belief systems in the room and then moving into the meditation.
Thank you. Some similar experiences, and I do teach Qigong and Tai Chi Easy quite a bit. There, there are ways that I experience that seem to work to language the broader range that says you may feel that you are in touch with nature. You may feel like you are reaching your fingers out into the love of God. You may feel, so languaging across the continuum, I think can be very helpful so that nobody's going, well, where's mine? Where's my example? But I had my most profound experience with this as my mother was nearing end of life and was in a lot of pain and still a lot of grief. And she would ask me to share with her the things that I was doing with the meditative movement. And I knew that for her, for me to use some of the language I usually use would be less useful than if I would just say, feel the arms of Jesus wrapping around you. And so in an individual basis, you can go deep into it. And then in a group, I think you can do the smorgasbord kind of thing and allow that to be a part of it. One more quick thing. I have one of what I trained a number of my staff back in the days that we were doing the work in the community, mostly with the Latino community. And one of our older promotoras really picked up on this stuff. And she went into her church. She invited me a few times to come and join her. She would do it in Spanish. I would do it in English. And man, did she language spirit. I mean, it was the whole teaching was like the room was filled with spirit and prayer. And I'm getting goosebumps even remembering it, but it was powerful. So I think, yes, the answer is yes.
Did you want to make, oh no, then yes.
Thank you for the beautiful presentations. My name is Oluwabanke Adewusi, and I am a research biochemist at the Center for Research in Traditional, Complementary, and Alternative Medicine in the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research. And I also do doctoral studies at the College of Medicine, University of Lagos, Nigeria. So in the past 10 years, I've been working on medicinal plants, natural products, diet, nutrition, biochemistry, et al. So now I just wanted to make this kind of suggestion, question, the role of mindful nutrition, mindful eating. You see, when people eat, you have them holding their smartphones or doing a lot of things. They are not really taking in the flavors. They don't get to do that healthy combination on their plate. And these things are very important. So mindful nutrition, mindful eating, two different things. Those should be woven into the programs. And the second one, which is more of a question, how do we build programs and trainings to deploy these integrative medicine across diverse communities? For instance, where I'm coming from in Nigeria, they want to tell somebody about acupuncture, they go like, Akiwa? What are you saying? Yeah, and you talked about the language of choice and all. It's important that we also put into consideration deploying and training those who will be the administrators of these things, and then also having a mechanism to educate and enlighten the trainers, then reaching out to the communities to get their story and use it to weave the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
Go ahead.
I deeply appreciate that comment and thank you for bringing it up. And I just wanted to add, I have been hoping for, holding a vision for, and wanting to see more and more of people from the communities that are the ones that we hope to reach, building from within, something I've sort of mentioned, but in the process of watching, for example, the mHealth world around meditation, at one point, the Calm, I've been working with them on their advisory board for a number of years. They started having, Black celebrities come into the talk. And then slowly but surely, they're beginning to build content that is by and for African Americans. Headspace has got a beautiful set, but what about the Exhale app? It is a beautiful app that was developed by and for a set of African American women who initiated the program, and now they've got a lot more variety in that program. And they talk about in their meditations things having to do with dealing with microaggressions. You're not going to get that anywhere else. So absolutely critical that cadre of people from the groups that will be benefiting from that are creating on their own content.
I had a comment that's a little bit of a tangent because we're talking about, in general, mind, body, nutrition, meditation. Something else that I tried, I read about it. I believe this is a Japanese practice. It's called forest bathing. Yeah, I don't know. I see some nods, so some people have heard of it. I read a book on it, and a part of, the tools I use for my healing, other than the writing, was going to a local state park if you have access to one where you're living or not too far away. It's a wonderful way to just leave your cell phone in the car, just be completely disconnected. Don't have headphones or music or anything, and just walk in a place that's just surrounded by the noises, sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustling of dried leaves as you step on them. And there's something about that experience that for me made me feel closer to God. And so it was just a very, very interesting experience. So something else, maybe if you want to try to either do it yourself or recommend to people that you're helping.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, I totally agree with what both have said. And the nutrition, the mindful nutrition and mindful eating, I think that's so important for our community to figure out how to, and we talked about this yesterday a bit, how do we actually implement that across communities that don't have as much access right now? And so I think that is essential. So I'm so thankful for you to say that. And it's certainly a part of what we try to approach in our group medical visit. But really, it's a broader issue of access across communities. And then just playing off of what Niyati was saying and Linda, really, as we explore with other communities, and by the way, these practices have been in other communities a lot longer in some forms. And so developing from within, and there's, for example, a shaking and dancing exercise that we do that really has African, Middle Eastern roots. And so actually the communities in those areas kind of going back to their own practices also and helping us develop a broader view.
Thank you. We have a question here and a question in the chat.
Yeah, just curious, do you have any suggestions for such as that 8-week program that you talked about that is absolutely wonderful, of just kind of how to break down the barrier when people say, I already have so many appointments, I cannot engage in anything else. I can't even think about it. We often hear that, right? When there are all these wonderful programs, but people just don't think they have the capacity, often don't. And so any just suggestions of how to kind of weasel around that?
Yeah, for sure. And part of it, so a lot of the work that's been done has been with 8-week programs like MBSR and the Center for Mind Body Medicine. Ours was a 4-week program. And actually there are others in the field that are doing, one time or two sessions, et cetera. So I think people are realizing that patients have a lot, especially in active treatment and advanced or metastatic cases. It can be really hard to try to sign up for that standard. But I think we are, as a community, starting to think about, hey, how do we present this to patients so that maybe a nugget comes away and then they can explore more later if that feels right. So I think part of it is some of the pilots that folks are doing across to start to get into it. And then the other, and some of Linda's work has really pointed to this, is that for patients to get the most out of this work, when they come into it with interest is when they're going to actually leave with more nuggets, whatever it is that they want to learn. And so ensuring that you're resonating with what a patient is coming to you with. So if they want something small or just a yoga class or, not just, but whatever it is that's going to resonate for them will be most successful as a starter.
Great. I'm just going to go to did you?
Just a quick comment.
Please, I'm sorry.
You gave the example of, patients saying they don't have enough time. Well, I was guilty of that. The cancer center recommended that I join a support group, and my excuse, I had the time, I can always make time. My excuse was that, I'm busy. I have 2 kids at home, a full-time job. And the reason why I didn't go to the support group is because some of the things that Linda talked about, I didn't feel that sense of belonging. And I didn't feel that sense of belonging because when I went through chemotherapy, there wasn't a single person of color that was being treated. There wasn't a single person of color that was in the care team, meaning a doctor or nurse in that cancer center. And there was nobody under the age of
Yeah.
60. And I was 34. I had nothing in common. Right. And because it's a smaller town, most people do have parents, in-laws, maybe an uncle, a cousin, someone, right? We have nobody. So going to that support group, I didn't feel that sense of belonging. So when a patient says that they're too busy, maybe try to dig into, is it that they don't want to come because they don't belong? And they will make the time if it really appeals to them.
Thank you. Thank you. Santosh, I'm just going to have a quick check on time. I've got a couple questions. Yeah. So therapeutic relationships oh, I'm sorry. I have a lot more questions on the chat now. I think Anna Fonfa may have been asking about therapies that involve a practitioner doing something rather than doing things which someone with cancer can do for themselves. The examples were acupuncture, massage, as opposed to meditation, movement, eating healthy. This is the difference between support from another and self-management. Does the panel think both are important for most people? Might emphasizing self-management only put a lot of responsibility and stress on people who are already struggling with their energy? What is the role of therapeutic relationships with integrative medicine practitioners?
I'll take a first stab. I think both, I'm a and kind of person. And so I think both are really important, and it really depends on what is the need of a patient. What are the barriers, as Niapi was just saying, what do we have access to at a particular location? So all of that can be supportive. And I totally agree with the person who put that in, that it can also be very overwhelming for patients to have so many options and feel like I should be going to acupuncture, I should be doing this, but I don't have the time, or I don't want to make the time, or I have a lot of other priorities in life. And so I think talking through that with patients and really understanding part of the assessment of what are the barriers, what are going to be the top high priority items. Maybe acupuncture is actually the most useful for someone because they've got hot flashes and pain and fatigue. And so you start there versus, maybe priority number 2, 3, 4, and just, I like to start with SMART goals. And so very specific, timely, and measurable and attainable, which usually means kind of starting with 1 or 2 items.
Great, great.
Hi, Jun Mao from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Thank you for the survivor to share your incredible story. You did mention during this phase of survivorship, suddenly no more medical appointment. There's enormous emotion often survivors go through themselves. I do think it's a great opportunity for the medical mind-body visits that, Kavita has talked about. I'm just wondering, the two of you can comment, are there ways we can make integrated medicine much more structured in the cancer care delivery pathway? So that way, because a lot of what we do are much more scalable group visit and give survivors a sort of a contact with the medical system, so to allow them to process those emotions in a structured and supportive medical way. But what's your thoughts? I think we need to really move in rather than haphazard. It's more, it's not like a radiation, like it's part of your pathway. It's sort of like you find it on your own, or you have a doctor refer, but then if you're seeing other people, you're just not getting it.
I'll start from the patient or survivor point of view. So not everyone, all of the patients are going to be like me, who is the biggest self-advocate. I will ask for what I need and I will chase it till I get it. So when it came to the struggles of survivorship, I was reaching out to the cancer team. They met with me. They would let me sit there and talk or cry or do whatever it takes to get through that phase. And now over time, it's gotten better. What cancer care teams and, people in the business should be really cognizant of are the introverts. are the ones who think, oh, well, I don't want to bother my oncologist. They're so busy. You know, I'm just one patient, they see 50. For me, I was like, yeah, I'm one patient. I am the only patient because I have to survive for my kids. I
Mm.
just do. But everyone is not like that. So we have to be
Mm.
mindful of those people and not let them fall behind. Now, does that mean to ease off, like not just rip it off as a Band-Aid, but maybe see them in a quarter, like in 3 months, let them come back and you check on their mental health and maybe physical health, right? Or what kind of cadence works for them. It needs to be customized. Everyone will not have the same need. Some might say, hey, I don't want to see your face for 6 months. I was back in the cancer center in 10 days. It was just a struggle. I wasn't used to being on my own anymore. So that would be a point from a survivor.
June, I think a really, again, critical piece for us as an integrative oncology community. A couple of thoughts. One is access. And so there are certain personality types that maybe won't access integrative oncology. And clearly we know that there are socioeconomic factors, racial factors, a lot of different factors of who is accessing integrative onc and who is not. And so I think, yes, assessment of that and figuring out what are the barriers in all of our communities. Practically, another thing that we are, when I have more bandwidth, trying to start is actually an integrative oncology group, and Donald Abrams, who was here, he has started this at UCSF, and it's a way for us to be able to bring in more patients earlier in their process so that they're not sort of learning about it happenstance or learning about it because they happen to read something or they happen to know somebody, but really a more systematic way to let patients know with a bird's eye view of what are the potential points that may make sense for them at an earlier place, so that when they get to that, they may be able to actually get into the right, hands or right places. So I think group medical visits are an important piece of that. Figuring out what are the barriers in communities is an important piece of that. And then ultimately, thank you for getting all of this into some of the guidelines, because once we have, we have the science and it's in the guidelines, we can try to get insurance and authorization and ways to help support a broader sector of our patients to get this care.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back to the chat quickly. In the chat, they made the comment of the forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, and there is a link for a book on Amazon on this. I didn't know, Morgan, if we would be able to send that to the whole group. Chat just shifted again. Here we go. And the comment, work with advocacy groups to help reach patients. Therapeutic relationships can develop with other living creatures in nature, including trees and plants. Nature-based therapies are great, but maybe we don't use that language. Just telling people, go for a walk in a place that you love can help them physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then there's a question in the chat. I'm curious to learn about when is the best time to share the information about integrative approaches.
I actually had been thinking if I had picked up the mic for that last question, I would have said just one thing: patient navigator. And there's been so much evidence placed, whether you're navigating people through their screening process or you're navigating people through their having just had a diagnosis, what now process, that having that person is the focal point and introducing those concepts can be done all at the beginning with getting assessments of the kinds of things that may be appealing to them, and then having that conversation. It takes a kind of a coach to walk them through. And I absolutely think it's critical to do it that way. The system, yeah, it's going to take a while to get the systems to get their act together, to kind of talk to each other and affirm and confirm the utilization of these things and how they work together. But it's a navigator that brings it together.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. Amazing panel. Thank you so much for all your perspectives. I really loved how this was interwoven with our other discussion this morning about awareness, interconnectedness, consciousness on a quantum level, and biological level, and now into this psychosocial, the way that we are taking care of patients across multiple cultures and who bring their own cultural backgrounds to the table. And so I just offer a couple of comments, and then maybe there's a question embedded in there too. So I thought it was interesting, because we are now like such a multicultural society, and also we have access to these culture specific practices, ancient culture specific practices, the bridging of East and West, that we have to be mindful of cultural appropriation, but at the same time, we can dive deep into what is at the core of these practices that is universal. And so when you Dr. Larkin, you said that we can think broadly about how to language certain things and make things a little bit more pliable. Some of these practices, it reminds me of our mindfulness teacher at MSK. She told me a story of how she started meditation with transcendental meditation, and you have a mantra, and that was how she got into the practice, and then later also did mindfulness. But nowadays she uses a sound that is meaningful to her from her Jewish background, and so that she's felt taken more meaning from that. So and in the same way, this question of like prayer, prayer can be, I think, a loaded word, because I think it conjures up a lot of religious institutionalism and all that. But spirituality is a part of this consciousness, interconnectedness. And so to what degree do we, name it prayer, religion, spirituality, and to what degree do we bring in like chaplaincy into like these mind-body practices and integrated medicine? And then to comment on Dr. Mao's last thought, I just wondered if one aspect of giving patients a way to kind of integrate their cancer journey into their lives, if there are ways of more of like a guided forum of introspection that's not necessarily just them on their own or them being observant of what they're feeling, but like sort of a guided awareness. It relates to one of your slides. The last point was, cognitive and insight, like self-awareness, like that's one form of mind-body medicine, right? Insight, self-awareness. In some ways, therapy can do that, but there are other modalities as well. And to bring in a way for people to really process their journey and how to integrate that into, what's to come, I think is very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's so much in that, which is all really interesting and I think meaningful. So I'll just pick up a few things, and I'm sure my other cohort will touch on things too. So you bring up a huge topic of religion and prayer, and we talked a little bit about it earlier. I think, so I think we can have that, knowing that meditation has in some ways come from religious backgrounds, but also it can be very much not that, and that's all of that is good and all of that is okay. And so as we practice it with patients, and as we practice it and think about it ourselves, we can allow that space to have it. And for some patients, if that was a really big part of what they came in with, that was great and that was working for them. And so we built around that. And for other patients, it was really not a part of how they came in. And so we built around that. And there was space for, I think that there is space for both of that. In terms of guided imagery, yes, I think for many patients, a sort of classic sitting meditation, you imagine this, orange robed guru on the Himalayas, that's not always resonating for patients. And so guided imagery, movement, other practices can be really an important piece of teaching meditational practices.
So thank you, everyone. A big applause to our panel.